Welcome back, everyone. It's time for our third speaker, which means we're only a week away from our live event. Don't forget to register for the live 2-hour event on January 30th, where you'll have a chance to meet with our speakers and to dig deeper into the topics that they were discussing. And you can find that link above my head if you haven't registered. But if you've already registered and you're receiving these messages in your email because you've registered, but you haven't joined our Facebook page, then by all means, join us on Facebook. And that way you'll get a chance to get to know each other better. You'll get to see additional information and ways that we share encouragement with each other. Also, I encourage you to like and to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that as we post future topics and conversations, you won't miss out. Our goal is to keep in touch with you throughout the year with encouraging messages and topics that are on our hearts and minds. And if this is the only way we can do it, virtually is the only way we can right now. So we don't want you to miss out on that. Today, I'd like to welcome our third speaker. I'm sure that you'll appreciate all that she has to share with us about her life and her struggle with poverty and the fears that type of childhood or that type of growing up in poverty has, all those fears that it can cause. And I think we'll be excited to hear how God was able to use those struggles in her life for her to be able to help others. So please welcome Kathleen Stanely back for our third year. It's great to have you back. We are so happy that you joined our team. And I guess you like us since you keep coming back.
I absolutely love you guys. And I'm just grateful that you allowed me to come back. So thank you so much. So for my talk today, we're going to be talking about being unafraid. And I want to share with you my journey from living in fear to living in peace. But before we start, I want all of you to get a piece of paper and something to write with. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So for over 10 years, I worked in the field of psychology. And what I know from my work is that almost everybody has an irrational fear or two. And I mean almost everybody. So I want you to take that piece of paper, and I don't want you to think about this too long. I want you to just very quickly write down 2 things that you're afraid of. And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you 2 of my fears. So my first fear is the Fort Pitt tunnels. Every day I travel to work and I have to go through the Fort Pitt tunnels. And I have this irrational fear that one day I'm going to be in the tunnels and the mountain above it is going to collapse and leave me trapped inside. And I've thought about this for so long and so hard that I have done a little planning. So I know where every exit is. I know where every oxygen mask is. And yes, there are oxygen masks inside the Fort Pitt tunnel. And I've even practiced what would happen if I got stuck in this tunnel after the mountain collapsed. And I've done what so many people do. I get to the front of the tunnel and I say, okay, I'm going to hold my breath and see if I can make it to the other side without breathing. And I've even gone so far to say, okay, I made it. And now I'm going to see if I can make it to the end of the bridge, almost close to town. So that is one of my fears. One of my other fears is being homeless. And this one is a little bit odd because I have no idea, nor have I ever been in a position where I might be homeless. I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh in a beautiful home with a beautiful family. I moved out to the suburbs. I live in a beautiful home with a beautiful family. So this fear of being homeless was really foreign to me. And I started asking myself some deep questions. And what I realized was that this fear of homelessness was something more. There was something deep seated in me that made me fear ultimately losing my house. So my marriage with fear began when I was in 5th grade. We had this math teacher who loved to do these little math drills. And he would call 2 students up to a board, and he'd put 2 math problems on the board, and he would set the timer. And whoever got it done first and correctly got a little treat, and the other person, got a little boot. So on this particular day, I got called to the board with a good friend of mine. And as I stood there looking at this green chalkboard, I realized that I was not going to get this problem done quickly. So my friend, of course, got it done first, and I got it done, but it wasn't right. So the teacher gave the prize to my friend, and everybody gave him a round of applause. And then he walked over to me and put his hands on my shoulders and turned me around to the class. And he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to stupid Stanley." Stanley was my last name. And that comment set the stage for the next 20 years of my life. For weeks after that comment, kids would walk up and down the hallway and they'd call me Stupid Stanley. In fact, the teacher himself would call me Stupid Stanley in the hallways. And somehow this one little event changed the course of my life. And no matter what I faced, every time I didn't measure up or I didn't succeed, I came back to that moment at that chalkboard and said, "You are stupid." He's right. You're absolutely stupid. So when my greatest challenge in life came, my husband of 15 years left our marriage, and I found myself unable to support myself. I had no college education. I had no job. I had 2 kids to take care of, one who was disabled, and I had no idea how I was going to do it. But somehow I pulled myself together and said, I'm going to go to college. And I did. I got a degree in psychology. And those of you that know anything about social work or psychology know that therapists don't make a lot of money. And for me, even though I had a decent job of $9 an hour, I was living in poverty. I didn't know from one day to the next how I was going to pay my bills. And it led me to make decisions that to some people were poor decisions, but to me, they were a necessity. If I didn't make these decisions, my kids wouldn't eat. So I drove around in a car that had no insurance. I drove around in a car that wasn't inspected and wasn't registered. I didn't pay the taxes on my house because in my mind, I thought, I can't pay these right now, but maybe at the end of the year, I'll get enough back from my income tax return and I'll catch up. I made a lot of decisions that to the outside person looked really poor, but to me, they were about survival. They were about putting food on my table and clothes on my kids' backs and paying for this, junk car to get me back and forth to work so I could make $9 an hour, so that I can get up every day and continue to struggle. And what happened was I began to live in this vicious cycle of fear. And even when things were good and I was having a good day, and there were good days, I'm not going to lie, in the back of my mind, I would think, is this the day that my car is going to break down? Is this the day that my furnace is going to go? Is this the day that a $50 repair is going to leave me in tears? And when I tell you that a $50 repair would send me reeling for months, I'm not kidding. We had the basic necessities here in my home, and every single day became a struggle. And even on the good days, I would think, is this the day that the tunnel is going to collapse on me? And unknowingly, I transferred some of this fear to my kids, not purposefully. It wasn't until later that my daughter came to me and told me that when her and my son would go to lunch at school, that they have this horrible fear. They'd go through the lunch line and put all their food on the plate and on the tray, and they'd get up to the cashier only to hear these words: "Your mother's behind. She didn't put any money on your account. You have to put that food back." Awful. So that fear got transferred to my kids to the point where they just stopped going to lunch, and they wouldn't tell me that they weren't eating lunch at school. See, poverty doesn't just affect your finances. I found myself socially isolated from my friends and my family. I couldn't go to the coffee shop with my friends. And if they were going out for the night, I couldn't go. I didn't have $50 to spend heading out for the night for dinner. I couldn't even afford a coffee shop. If they had gone to McDonald's, I couldn't have even afforded that. I had to think, do I have enough gas money to get there? Because sometimes my gas money got me to and from work, and that was it. So I became very isolated from my friends and family. So much so that when my family would have functions, we all pitched in. There were 6 of us. So if we had a family function for Christmas or whatever it may be, everybody got the phone call, right? What are you bringing? What are you making? And there's Kathleen. I couldn't make anything. I couldn't afford it. And this fear made me live in isolation even more. And poverty causes you to live in this fear of judgment, because on the outside looking in, it looks like I'm irresponsible. It looks like I'm a bad mom. Why are your kids wearing the same clothes to school day after day? Why don't they have nice new things? Why aren't you paying your bills? Why can't you afford that $50 repair? So poverty affects not just your finances, but other really important areas of your life. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're living in this horrible state of fear every single moment. There wasn't a day that went by that I wasn't living in some kind of fear. Fear of being homeless, not being able to provide for my kids, being judged. So you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, isn't she supposed to tell us how she got through all this unafraid? I got news for you. I was afraid every day of my life. And it taught me something. So in 2016, I was so frustrated with where I was at, and I was angry. I was angry at the system. I was angry at the world for telling me if I went to college that life would be better. I was angry that I was helping people and I needed help myself. I was angry that I was stubborn and prideful and couldn't reach out to the people that loved me and said, listen, I need some help. I began to pray for a new job, and I put my resume out on Indeed.com, and the very day I did that, a job post popped up for a director of outreach at a church in Sharpsburg. And I was like, oh, this looks really great. I get to work at a church. And so I posted my resume to the job, and within minutes, that pastor called me. We set up an interview. We had 3 or 4 interviews. And a month later, they called me and said, we'd like to offer you the job. Well, you'll never guess what this job was. So part of the duties that I would have as the director of outreach was to work in the community of Sharpsburg, teaching people how to get out of poverty. You talk about funny. Our God is funny, isn't he? And I remember saying to myself, you've got to be kidding me. You want me to teach people how to get out of poverty? See, but God knew something that I didn't know. And he was about to turn my life upside down and use my story as a testimony. And as God began to draw me close to him, and I began to walk towards God, instead of saying, I can do this on my own, I don't need you, I can handle this on my own, he began to reveal his plan for my life. And things began to change. In fact, amazing things began to happen. And not just for me, but for this little community of Sharpsburg that was every bit as broken as I was the day I drove into it. You know, in the year 2020, we have heard the phrase faith over fear a lot. And I'm not going to lie to you. Every time I'd hear it, it made my blood boil. And at one point, I went to my pastor. I said, why is this so upsetting for me? Why am I so angry when people say faith over fear, faith over fear? And God reminded me of my story and that I didn't get through those things without being afraid. And bad things happened. They happened when I was a child. That should have never happened to me. That teacher should have never said those things to me. And it set me on a course that changed my life. People come into our lives, they die, tragic things happen. That didn't stop. So when people would say, Kathleen, you've got to have faith over fear, I didn't know what they meant. And I started thinking about the amazing things that happened in Sharpsburg since I've been there in 2016. And that community has just been turned around, not by Kathleen, but by God. See, God used the gifts that I had that I was hiding under a bushel because I was afraid. I lived every day in fear. Anytime I'd look at a job or I'd think I could do this or I could do that, God would remind me, or sorry, the enemy would remind me. And I'd hear that little voice and I'd hear that teacher in the back of my head say, you're stupid. You can't do that. So I was not living up to my full potential. I wasn't using the gifts that God gave me to use for his glory. And living in poverty was just one of those things that, you know, I walked through by myself. I didn't call on God to help me through that. I didn't call on my friends or my family to help me through that. I remember one time walking into a Bruegger's bagel, just desperate one day, thinking, you know, maybe I'll get a bagel on the way to work. And I said to the manager, what do you do with all your leftover bread and your bagels at the end of the day? He said, we throw them out. And I said, listen, there are days I can't feed my kids. I'm working, you know, sometimes 60, 70 hours a week. I make poverty wages. Is there any way I could stop by and pick up that bread that you're going to throw away? And he just looked at me and said, absolutely. There was no judgment in his eyes because I was expecting it. I was expecting, you know, that I would be judged. I was going to be a poor mom. I didn't know if he was going to call CYF. I didn't know what was going to happen. And there were days that we lived on bagels because that's all I could get. And even asking for help was fearful. I was afraid to ask my family for help, my friends for help. And this year, 2020, was really difficult for me because, not because of COVID, and not because of all the uncertainty of the world that we're living in right now, but I was angry. I was angry at hearing people say you have to have faith over fear. And I was watching some of my very close friends die and get sick. And I didn't understand what people meant by that. And I started reading the Bible and asking God, show me what it means to be unafraid. So when I was asked to talk at this conference, I was like, oh, I should tell them I'm probably not the person to be talking about being unafraid. And God said, no. So I started reading, what do you mean, God, by not being afraid? And I want to read something to you. I'm going to get my phone. I want to read Psalm 23. And I know that you have all heard this, and there's probably been a million sermons, but something in this psalm touched me this time that had never touched me before. So it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely and goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I started digging through the Bible and found that God tells us to not be afraid all through the Bible. There's a lot of verses that say, do not be afraid. But we take that, and sometimes we think that means, don't be afraid, I'm going to save you from that cancer. Don't be afraid, I'm going to save you from losing your child. Don't be afraid, I'm going to save you from getting COVID. I'm going to save you from that tragic accident. But we all know that that's not always true. People die, people get sick, bad things happen, right? And what God does say, everywhere he says, do not be afraid, if you continue to read, he tells you why. In almost every instant, not all of them, but almost every instance, he says, do not be afraid. Do you know why? Because I am with you. Even in Psalm 23, he talks about, I prepare a table before you in the presence of your enemies. We're still going to have enemies. And enemies aren't the people that we dislike. Enemies are the people that dislike us. Enemies are the people that want to harm us. So we're still going to face enemies. We're still going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But God's going to be right there with us. So being afraid means knowing that no matter what we face, God is right there with us. That is his promise. My pastor said to me today when we were talking about my talk with you this evening, he said, I like to replace the word fear with courage. He said, because having courage is acting and moving forward in the face of fear. And I thought, yeah, that is what it's about. So many of the bad things that have happened in all of our lives don't necessarily stop. I know that they haven't stopped for me. I've lost 4 friends in 2020 to COVID. And life happens, right? It continues to happen. But here's what I found out. That God has greatness for all of us. But if you don't remove that veil of fear, you'll never see it and you'll never live into it. And the day that I said yes to God in accepting a job, working with people who were in poverty when I was in poverty, was a step of faith. Okay, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm going to move. I'm going to say yes, because if I'm going to live in poverty, I'd rather live in poverty doing something that I love than continue to do something that just brings me down. And lo and behold, God turned my story upside down. I want to read a quote to you that I found about being unafraid. And it really just hit home for me. It says, when we are compelled to do something we know we are outmatched for, we let fear talk us out of doing it, which means we let fear talk us out of the opportunity to experience God. I want you to know this, that your weakness, your fear is a platform for the greatness of God to be on display. When I think of my story and where it began, I realized that letting go of fear does not mean that I won't face challenges. It just means that when I lean into God and when I trust God, that he'll get me through it. He'll walk through it with me. And no matter what I've faced since 2016, good or bad, God has walked through it with me. And in that brings a sense of peace and harmony and what I call shalom, what God calls shalom. And I want to tell you what happened with my math story. So all from 5th grade until 12th grade, I continued to do horrible in math. It didn't matter if I was in remedial math. I flunked terribly. And when I decided to go to college, I had the worst panic attack on the first day of my first math class, Algebra 1. And I was in an absolute panic, walked out of the classroom, and the professor came out and he said, "What is going on?" And I'm in tears and I'm telling him my story about this teacher and how stupid I am and I'll never be able to do this. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, "Don't you dare let fear stop you from living into what you're supposed to do." And you know, I got an A in that class. And then I got an A in Algebra 2. And then I took statistics 1, 2, and 3. And I passed all of that. See, God turned that around for me because he knew I needed resolution. He knew that even in my weakness, I needed to see that I wasn't stupid, that that teacher wasn't right. I'm not a mathematician, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. No matter what I face, I'm not afraid of it. I don't want to lose my children. I don't want to lose my house. But I know now that when you lean into God and when you walk towards God, that walking through that valley of the shadow of death, and we all do, and we all will, that God's right there with me. And if I keep my eyes on him, he's going to show me the way out. That's what I want to share with you today, that being unafraid is not about blindly saying faith over fear is going to get me through and bad things aren't going to happen to me. God is going to walk through that with you. God is the one that walks through the fear with us. Bad things will continue to happen. Good things will continue to happen, but it's really up to you how you choose to get through that, with God or without.
Wow, Kathleen, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to try to hold it together. It was great. I think it's interesting that just like you didn't think that you should be the person who is teaching people how to get out of poverty, and God used you and worked through you, you also didn't think you should be the person talking about being unafraid.
Nope.
But he did talk through you, he did use you, and I appreciate every part of this.
Thank you. I almost backed out, you know.
Did you?
When you first called me, I was like, oh, she got the wrong person. And but like everything, you know, God talks to me, and I've just stopped living in that place of fear.
Well, I'll have you know that every single year that we've done the conference, somebody that approached to speak who didn't want to, who literally tried to talk themselves out of it over and over again, and God clearly told them to share their story, and every single time it has been a great blessing. So thank you for being part of it.
Thank you for having me.
I really look forward to your breakout sessions, and I know that you're going to have a lot of people looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you on the 30th, and good night, everybody, or good morning, or whenever you're watching this. We hope that you find it to be as much of a blessing as I have.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.